His name is Adam Whitlock. He is an assistant principal at a state secondary school in England. Hello, Adam. How are you?
Hi, good to see you, Jonathan. Always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure indeed, and thank you so much for joining us, because today universities could now face penalties if they fail to uphold free speech as new protections for academic freedoms come into force. The Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act came into force today, which will require universities and colleges in England to promote academic freedom to ensure discussions can take place on campuses without fear of censorship of students, staff or speakers expressing lawful opinions. It also bans universities from using non-disclosure agreements in cases of bullying, harassment and sexual misconduct. The Labour Minister, Skills Minister Baroness Jackie Smith, has said that the government, and I quote, will not tolerate the silencing of academics or students who voice legitimate views. I think this was inspired after Professor Kathleen Stock recently received a record payment of around £585,000 when a penalty was issued by the Office for Students against the University for Sussex because she simply said a woman doesn't have a penis, something that should not be a shock to any of us in this country, but seemingly she was harangued by the trans rights lobby, who actually aren't standing up for trans rights at all. They're just looking to agitate with hard left views. But Adam, is this a welcome thing? Because obviously you work in the education space. Was there a real issue, do you think, in enabling views that didn't align with the hard left or lefty establishment to be actually expelled, should I say, in both higher education settings?
Yeah, I think we all know that the education sector is typically leaning towards the left in people's thought and in their politics. There's a small number of us, I would say, like me, that sit more on the sort of centre right. And I think what I would say is that is a downstream effect for schools. So obviously I don't work in a university, I work in a secondary school and run the sixth form. But what I have seen is the impact of what we've been watching happen at universities have a downstream effect to schools. So it's very welcome to me. Although I would say that schools are not immune from the same kind of ideological conformity that we worry about in universities. You know, we teach young people how to think, not what to think, and we see that very clearly in our policies around sort of social, morals, spiritual, cultural education, British values that demand that open, critical thinking on topics like gender identity, colonialism, religion, race, etc. And in my sixth form, I've spent years fostering debate, really wanting students to not fear the social ostracism that can come from just having a view that they might have. And I actually think it's very dangerous when we stifle opinion, stifle free speech. Just look at that Warwickshire school that was isolating a student during Diversity Day for wearing the Union Jack dress and preparing a speech on British heritage. I mean, that is literally British values, and it got punished. So it's very welcome to me to see this act.
I mean, that is a great case of a real concern that we have, is it not? That for somehow it's ostracisation in some schools of anything to do with celebrating Britain. And it does seem a bit of a postcode lottery about whether or not you have a school full of teachers who are maybe able to leave their views at the door and remember that their job is to actually enable children to understand all sides of all issues and then allow their minds to expand and to figure out for themselves what their view is, as long as it is obviously an informed viewpoint, rather than, as you say, in universities now, it seems to be you have to join with the cult of the left if you want to be able to join the student union or indeed participate in anything without being cancelled. I mean, we've seen literally leading figures like Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, when he's gone to universities, having to pay for his own security, or indeed the organisations that have arranged for him to come speak spend thousands of pounds in order to allow him to come and engage with students. I mean, isn't this just utter madness?
It is complete madness. Universities are meant to be intellectual crucibles. They're not meant to be ideological echo chambers. Kathleen Stock, as you say, got hounded out of Sussex for her lawful gender-critical views. Jordan Peterson had his invitation to Cambridge withdrawn. You mentioned Jacob Rees-Mogg. There's a great quote, just following on from a name like Jacob Rees-Mogg, that Thatcher has, which is, "There is no freedom unless there is freedom to say what others may not wish to hear." We're in a generation that's creating a fear for saying the wrong thing. So it's incredibly welcome, this act, to sort of lift the scrutiny around people that have the right to come and speak to students, and those kind of militant student union organizations that have perhaps done a lot more harm than good, I would say, in terms of hounding out people that have the right to speak. is really important that we allow this to happen. I invite speakers into my school regularly, and I think you've been one of them once, Jonathan.
Yeah.
And you saw yourself, how difficult it can be to manage different opinions and views, even within the students and their reactions sometimes. And that's all that downstream effect. And I'm very worried, A, for the students that apply to university that are second checking whether they want to go to university now because they're worried about potentially their religious views or their political views or what they might write in an essay, whether it gets downgraded and things like that. I've heard that before. But also there's students that also have the view that we shouldn't allow certain people to come and speak. And I think, we need to have a balanced middle way, which says, I think, which is what this act does. But if you don't mind me saying, you mentioned earlier on your program, the Online Safety Act, and here's the biggest contradiction ever. It's got that ridiculous contradiction where we've now welcomed this Protecting Free Speech at University Freedom of Speech Act, and we've got this other act that risks strangling it online. And that contradiction really should worry anyone who values liberty and freedom.
That's a great point. We'll see if any politicians pick up on that one, Adam. And I'm keen to sort of see, because obviously this Labour government has now said that they plan to introduce votes for 16 and 17-year-olds, whilst also, as you say, having an Online Safety Act that says that they can't access certain things, some things rightly so, by the way, that shouldn't be accessed. But also we have seen speeches literally made by members of the Parliament in the House of Commons being censored because of fear it would breach the Online Safety Act for quoting court cases when it came to child rape gangs. As you say, there are 16 and 17-year-olds still learning to understand maybe how to hear different views. Yes, when I came to visit Kensington Norwich Academy, I really respected the student body that was there in the sixth form that you had for challenging me on my views when it came to saying that I didn't think white privilege was a thing. But having the ability to stand there and then discuss that issue with me, yes, at times some of those students' temperament got a little hot, but it's an emotive issue. I understood that, but I respected the fact they had the fortitude to stand there and discuss it, and had teachers like yourself to enable that conversation to be prolonged and go on without it becoming, as you say, a sort of a throwing of insults on either side. I suppose the concern here being, again, is that are 16 and 17-year-olds, for example, even mature enough, in your view, to be able to vote, to understand these complex issues about who they should and should not vote for? Or is it going to end up being a cult of personality even further in our British politics, which I would assume would favour people like Jeremy Corbyn, who is authentic in his views, and Zara Sultana, who's very effective at using social media, and on the other side of the coin, Nigel Farage, who is, again, an authentic, a great communicator?
Yeah, it's a really tough one for me to answer because I obviously work with a lot of 16-year-olds, and I think there are some that are incredibly mature and they're at a point in their life where they can make informed decisions. They've read a lot, they've got a lot of evidence. There's equally a whole lot of other 16-year-olds that if I were to ask them who the current prime minister is, they'd look at me blank, and say who is that. So I think that does come with a lot of rights and responsibilities when you vote. You can't buy alcohol at 16, you can't serve on a jury at 16, you're still legally a child in school at 16, and Labour want to hand over that, say in the future of the nation, to 16-year-olds that we're not allowing those other things for. It seems like opportunism, in my opinion, as to why they're pushing for that vote than actual empowerment.
Well, Adam Whitlock, a great friend of ours here on Talk. He is a assistant principal at Kensington Norwich Academy in London. Thank you so much for joining us.